Last October, the Arsenal women's football team made headlines after they published their team photo for the 2023-24 season. And many people had a lot of things to say about how there were no players of color, which stands out given they're located in the extremely racially and culturally diverse London, UK, and is in stark contrast to the diversity we see in the Arsenal men's team. Fast forward 9 months later, and we're currently seeing something a bit different in the NWSL, where every team has multiple players of color who are not only on the roster, but are also producing good numbers. This video is going to be exploring this racial diversity difference between the National Women's Soccer League in the United States and the Women's Super League in England. Players of color are thriving in the NWSL this season, dominating the top of the goal scoring and assist stat sheets. How much are they dominating? Well, after 16 weeks of matches, the current top 5 goal scorers are Barbara Banda, Temwa Chawinga, Sophia Smith, Mallory Swanson, and Ulemata Sarr. And the top 5 in assists are Croy Bethune, Sophia Smith, Temwa Chawinga, Alyssa Thompson, and Barbara Banda. Now, if I stopped here, that would be more than impressive. I just named the top 5 players in scoring and in assists, and all of them were either Black or mixed race. But beyond the top 5, we continue to see similar, with 10 of the top 15 in combined goals and assists being players of color. But as great as it's been to see these numbers, one thing that's become glaringly more clear to me is just how different it is from the Women's Super League, which is the top women's football league in England. I mean, just look at this graph. Comparing the NWSL line in blue to the WSL line in orange, this graph is showing the number of players of color or non-white players in the top 15 of goals and assists by season over the past 5 years. So obviously the 2024 NWSL season is still happening, so this number may change, but as mentioned, there are currently 10 players of color in the top 15, compared to just 3 in the WSL this past season. Those 3 players being Bunny Shaw, Lauren James, and Mary Fowler. Now, full disclaimer, I counted Brazilians like Marta, Debinha, and Bia as non-white players part of these stats. 45% of Brazilians consider themselves mixed, which is how they look to me. But if you're watching this and you're Brazilian and these players would be considered white in Brazil, definitely let me know in the comments. Nonetheless, even if we remove Marta and Bia, who are included in the 10 players from this past season, that still means there's 8 of the top 15 in goals and assists who are players of color. And that's just been amazing to witness this season. And as you can see, what's happened this year is not a coincidence, but rather a long pattern of very few players of color producing top numbers in goals and assists in the Women's Super League over the years. So what's going on with the WSL? Well, simply put, there are just not as many non-white players playing in the Women's Super League. I took a look at the current WSL rosters, and there was an average of just 4 players of color per team, ranging from 0 players on Arsenal and Everton to 11 players on Chelsea. Whereas in the NWSL, they average double the number of non-white players with 8 per roster, from as little as 3 on Utah all the way up to 15 on Angel City. And by the way, Chelsea is the only team in the WSL with at least 10 players of color on their roster. The NWSL has 5 teams like that. Okay, so this looks a bit bad for the WSL, but to be honest, there are a few explanations that are a bit understandable. First, the obvious one is that the United States has a significantly bigger population than England. And the racial breakdown in the 2 countries are also different. There are just a lot more people of color in the United States than in England. So not only is the player pool of available girls bigger in the United States, but the player pool of non-white players is therefore also going to be bigger. Of the numbers I showed in this graph, half of these NWSL players are American. And to their credit, the U.S. Soccer Federation has been putting in work for many years to increase the diversity of girls who are playing the sport. As early as 2008, the U.S. Soccer Foundation noted that many girls were being left behind and a lot of them were not having the opportunity to play soccer. When discussing their strategy and business plan in 2023, CEO Ed Foster Simeon stated, we made a priority of increasing access and opportunity for underrepresented populations, particularly children in underserved communities. And it shows. Comparing the 2008 Olympics roster to this summer's Paris Olympics squad, the racial diversity of the US women's national team is much more representative now. And in contrast, the Lionesses have actually gone in the opposite direction, with the number of non-white players on their squad decreasing from 6 in 2008 to just 2 on last summer's World Cup squad. Now, another explanation for why we see a difference between these two leagues is that playing in the NWSL and the United States is just simply more attractive to some players. Now, not to label all European WSL fans, but there are a few of you who seem to have a hard time understanding how any player would want to play in the NWSL over Europe. But the reality is, there are just different things that players value when it comes to choosing a team. And for some, like Rafaeli, who left Arsenal to sign with Orlando Pride, things like playing on a team with 4 other Brazilians, or now living closer to Brazil, and you're also in a similar time zone so it's easier to communicate with family, things like this matter to a lot of players. Even Zambian striker and BFC player Rachel Kundananji, when speaking about why she joined the NWSL, said, "I just want to have a new experience. And it's been my dream to do it in the United States of America." So in situations like this, you really can't fault WSL teams too much when it comes to signing or extending a current player, because if they really just want to play in the NWSL, there's nothing you can do about that. Another reason that I think is fairly legitimate for why there are less players of color in the WSL that I don't think many people are aware of is that last year, the English football governing body, also known as the FA, approved new criteria post-Brexit that assigns points to players based on their club and international experience. It's called the Governing Body Endorsement System, and international female players need at least 24 points in order to get the proper approvals, like a work visa, to play in the WSL. The problem with this system is that teams outside of the top 20 in FIFA rankings, or if you're playing in a lower tier league, have a harder time reaching the required 24 points. So someone like Barbara Banda, for example, who's absolutely killing it in the NWSL, wouldn't have been automatically eligible to play in the WSL because Zambia is ranked 64th in the league and she was playing in the Chinese Women's Super League, and both of those factors wouldn't have given her enough points to reach the required 24. So if you're a WSL fan who's frustrated about why your team isn't signing certain players, consider the country that player is from next time, and it may give a good explanation for why they weren't able to get her. Now, even with those reasons just given, I'm still not letting the WSL in England entirely off the hook. As a federation, the FA has to do a much better job at the youth level to increase the diversity of players who are coming through the academies and eventually signing with their senior teams. In addition, more clubs need to increase the resources they provide to their women's side for scouting. The scouting team for women is generally much smaller than it is for the men and often heavily falls on the coach. And as we know, head coaches are extremely busy. And so what ends up happening is they often just recruit from places that they're most familiar with. For example, Jonas Eidevall, the Arsenal women's head coach, who is from Sweden, has signed or shown interest in many players who are either Swedish or played in Sweden. Recruiting players from all around the world, it just makes your team better. And having a good scouting team could help with that. Okay, so I just mentioned Arsenal and Jonas Eidevall, so let's talk about them for a bit. So when all of this attention was placed on their team photo, head coach Jonas Eidevall stated, "I think women's football has a diversity problem and getting people of color involved more in football." Which, look, he isn't wrong. Apart from D1 Feminine in France, there really isn't any other league whose offensive tables look as diverse as the NWSL. And even still, there's still significantly more white players playing in that league. It's a well-known fact that top leagues and teams in WSL are pretty white. And often this looks very different from their men's side. So yeah, it is a general issue like what Jonas said. However, there's still really no excuse for Arsenal to be one of just 2 teams that looks like this. Even with WSL's diversity issues, everyone else in the WSL has managed to have at least one player of color. Now, Arsenal actually came out and made a statement about this, indicating that their focus would be on growing diversity through their academy, but that their recruitment emphasis would be to just sign the best players that are available. To which yes, I commend them for the academy route, but their statement about their recruitment strategy, that they're just going to sign the best players available, kind of implies that the reason they haven't signed any players of color yet is because they're just going after the best players, and the best players are only white. To which I present their neighbors in West London, Chelsea. Emma Hayes, former Chelsea coach, actually wrote a goodbye letter to the fans in May, and one of the things she said in there was, "I wanted to provide you with a team that's reflective of you, a diverse group that we can all see ourselves in." Their management was intentional over the past few years to increase the diversity of the squad, and they've won consecutive titles using that approach. So if Arsenal's focus is on just signing the best available, well, that best has got them back-to-back third-place finishes. So maybe they need to think of a new approach. We're living in a time where players of color are getting more and more attention than they ever have before. And their good play is not only being recognized, but also rewarded. The top 5 most expensive transfer fees in women's football as of today include 4 players of color. And this is just the beginning. With the increasing popularity of women's football and the greater investments being made at the club level, we're going to continue to see more and more clubs start to value the skills that players from all over the world, not just Europe and North America, can bring to their team. Well, thanks so much for watching this video. As always, if you enjoyed it, please give it a like and let me know your thoughts about this topic or the video in the comments down below. My last couple of videos have actually been getting more comments, which makes me so happy. So if you're seeing this, definitely leave a comment down below. I would really appreciate it. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.